Hi, and welcome to Comedy Recapped. Today we will be examining 1990s. Beware, spoilers ahead. We open up with Jeffrey, trying to tell a pair of eyes and a brain to wake up, but nothing ends up happening. Suddenly, he gets the idea to lobotomize it, and he uses a scalpel and hammer. Suddenly, the brain starts to react, and he starts going crazy. Behind him, Jeffrey's mother asks him to pass the ketchup, and he gets pulled back to reality for a moment. Jeffrey's mother takes a tray of food out back to the birthday party that's going on, and everyone seems to be having a great time. She takes a second to talk to Jeffrey's fiancée, Elizabeth, and when she goes on her way, Elizabeth talks to her friend about how fat she is. She tells her friend that she even got Jeffrey to staple her stomach, and he can't seem to stay in medical school, since he got kicked out of 3. Back inside, Jeffrey is tampering with his brain, and he ends up overheating it. Just then, Elizabeth comes in to check on him, and she gets him to come out to join the rest of the get-together. As the day goes on, they end up giving Mr. Shelley his present, and we see that it's a bush hog. Elizabeth tries to show off the modifications that Jeffrey made to it, but she gets run over and mowed down in the process. Jeffrey becomes obsessed with trying to figure out how to rebuild Elizabeth's body, and he goes through the process of planning out all of the electrical components and body parts needed. When he takes a second to look around, we can see that his room is completely dedicated to this venture. He kisses the picture of Elizabeth, and he takes out a secret tape of a news report of Elizabeth's death. During the report, we find out that some of her body parts are actually missing, and the reporters go to ask Jeffrey if he knows what happened to the head. He plays it off as just missing, and the news report comes to an end. Shortly after, Jeffrey's mom comes in, and she tries to talk to Jeffrey about moving on with another girl. He tries to assure her that he's trying to find another girl, but she thinks that he's just hiding from the world. She brings up the idea of going back to medical school, but she gets distracted by the brain that Jeffrey is keeping in his fish tank. She's very impressed, but she's worried about him. He tries to tell her that he's worried about himself too, and he goes through all of the symptoms he's experiencing that make him think he's going mad. His mom offers him a sandwich as a way to help, but he turns her down. After she leaves, Jeffrey goes right back to worrying about Elizabeth, and he heads outside to get some equipment from the trunk of his car. He takes some of the equipment to the shed, and we can see that he has a whole workshop set up in there. When he opens the freezer, it's filled with the same purple liquid that the brain is sitting in inside. Soon, Jeffrey sits at his table in his room, and he has dinner with the missing body parts of Elizabeth. He tries to share a bottle of wine with Elizabeth's head, and he tells her that his plan will happen in about 2 days, when a big storm comes through. He shows her a couple rough models of bodies that she could have, and he tells her that he can make her into anything she wants if he could just find the right body parts. After reading her a rather romantic poem he wrote for her, he puts Elizabeth's body parts back into the freezer. He heads back inside to try and put the finishing touches on his plan, and he starts to struggle with the idea that someone has to die to bring her back to life. When he turns on the news, he sees that the storm is going to arrive right on schedule, and he decides that he's going to have to get radical if he's going to make his deadline. He grabs his tools, and he ends up drilling into his own brain to come up with some radical ideas. After coming up with a radical plan, he takes a drive into town to spot a lady of the night that fits the body type he's looking for. Eventually, he gets stopped by the woman, Honey, and he is absolutely mesmerized by her. When he tells her that he's going to need about 6 or 7 girls, she decides she needs to run it by her pimp, Zorro. They head to a nearby club, and Honey heads to the bathroom where Zorro is running a little side hustle. Honey talks to Zorro about what Jeffrey needs, and she leaves him to talk business. Zorro assures him that his girls are the best, and Jeffrey asks about the fun stuff while he's there. When Jeffrey gets home, he gets ready to use the stuff in the solution, but he seems to be losing it more and more. When he envisions Elizabeth as a horror on TV, he uses the drill to relieve the pressure in his brain again. Once he's done, he convinces himself that he isn't killing anyone. He's just putting a lethal amount of super crack in front of these women, and if they don't want it, they can simply refuse. Next, he decides to test his super crack on his guinea pig, and it works a little too well because the guinea pig explodes. Convinced that he's ready, Jeffrey goes to meet Honey and the other girls. Honey tells all of them that they have to go along with Jeffrey's fantasy, and he goes about playing doctor and examines all of them. By the time their 30 minutes is up, Jeffrey decides that he can't go through with it, and he tosses a bag of money at Honey. When Honey sees the bag of super stuff at the bottom, she declares that the party isn't over yet. All of the women smoke the super stuff, but Jeffrey tries his hardest to stop them. It doesn't work. Meanwhile, Zorro is waiting impatiently on the ground floor. He finally gets tired of waiting, and he rushes up the stairs to the room. Just before he gets there, the girls start to feel the side effects of the stuff, and they start to blow up. Body parts fly everywhere as the women continue to explode, and Zoro opens the door as Honey explodes. Honey's head goes flying into Zoro's head, and Jeffrey stands up to apologize to everyone. He promises to put everyone back together after he takes the parts he needs for Elizabeth, and he uses a black trash bag to pack up the body parts that litter the room. After packing up, he tosses the bags down the fire escape, and he follows after them. When he finally gets home, he takes all of the parts into the shed, and he starts putting Elizabeth together with the pieces of the women. The storm is coming in quick, and he realizes that he has to work quickly. He pieces together the perfect girl with what he's got to use, and he goes to the freezer to get Elizabeth's head as the final touch. He throws the rest of the body parts into the freezer, and he promises them that he'll get to them as soon as he can. Before he puts Elizabeth's head where it's supposed to go on the body, he tells her that he'll never let anything bad happen to her again. He goes to kiss her, but he drops her head on the ground. Just then, the storm starts to rage outside, and he sews each piece together. Jeffrey puts everything in place, and he flips the switch as the roof opens up to the storm outside. He raises the table with the body to the roof, and he waits until lightning strikes the antennae. What he doesn't expect is for the lightning to travel down the rod and strike the freezer in the shed. Jeffrey brings the table back inside, and he finds that Elizabeth's new body is already standing and waiting. When he takes off the cover, he looks upon his creation as Elizabeth starts talking to him like he's a John. When he tells her that he doesn't have any money, she smacks him unconscious and walks out of the shed to look for someone that will pay for action. While she walks down the street, the freezer in the shed starts shaking, and screaming can be heard inside. Elizabeth makes her way into town, and Jeffrey finally comes to. When he realizes where Elizabeth is headed, he hops in his car and heads for the working girl corner. Elizabeth ends up finding a John, and she takes him to the hotel where Jeffrey met all the girls. They head upstairs to a room, and the man is so excited to get down to business. While Elizabeth gets on top, the bed starts to smoke, and soon, the John ends up getting electrocuted. He still lived long enough to say what a good time he had. Suddenly, Jeffrey makes it to town, but he can't find anyone that has spotted Elizabeth. Meanwhile, Elizabeth grabs money from the dead John's wallet and makes her way back into the hallway. Another guy stops her, and he tries to put the moves on her. When he kisses her, he ends up getting electrocuted and dies too. Back on the street, Jeffrey starts to cause a stir when he mentions that he's looking for one of Zoro's girls. Everyone thinks that they're all dead, and he tries to get away. Meanwhile, Elizabeth makes her way to the club, and Zoro is sitting at the bar talking about losing his girls to explosions. Just then, Elizabeth walks in, and she quotes the dead woman's words about Zoro. Zoro overhears her, and he spots his brand on one of her arms. When Zoro's friend gets a little frisky downstairs on Elizabeth, he ends up getting electrocuted and explodes too. When Zoro sees this, he ends up punching her so hard that her head almost snaps off, and electricity shoots out of her neck. At the same time, Jeffrey makes his way into the club, and he puts her back in one piece. He takes her out to his car, and he speeds back home. What he doesn't know is that Zoro calls a taxi to follow them. When Jeffrey gets her back home, he resecures her neck, and he swears that this was never his intention. This time, when he brings her back, Elizabeth is back to her normal self, and she asks what happened to the birthday party. She pieces together that she died, and Jeffrey tells her what happened to her. She's so ecstatic about what Jeffrey was able to do, and she tells Jeffrey how proud she is. Then she realizes that her body isn't actually her body, and Jeffrey has to explain. What he doesn't see is that Zoro sneaks in and uses a machete to chop off Jeffrey's head. Zoro tries to take control of Elizabeth, but the girl's body parts in the freezer start to react to his presence. They knock over the freezer, and an abomination creeps out and attacks Zoro. It manages to shove Zoro into the freezer, and it locks itself in there with him. Elizabeth comes up with an idea, and soon, she wakes up Jeffrey with his new body. When he looks down, he can see that she used female parts to bring him back. He screams in horror, and the credits roll. That was a fantastic mix of comedy and special effects. This is a dark comedy for the ages. And that wraps up this recap. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this recap, please subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss a single video.